Elon Musk does not need to control the whole world because the world is already handing him the levers. In 2026, while your rent climbs, your wages lag, and AI quietly replaces entire job categories, a handful of men with timing, capital, and attention control systems you are told are too big to fail. And yes, one of those men is Elon Musk. This is not a fan video. This is financial education, and it is about power, incentives, and what happens when influence becomes a form of ownership. You grew up hearing stories about geniuses who changed everything with brilliance and courage. You were not taught the part that actually matters, how money moves first, how markets react second, and how the public gets trained to cheer right before the next trap closes. So here is what we are going to do. We will walk through the business logic behind the Iron Man image, the investor playbook hiding behind flashy promises, the way corporate control and attention control feed each other, and why the same pattern is accelerating right now in the real world of AI jobs, housing collapse, inflation scars, and institutional takeover of everything that once looked free. By the end, you will understand a cold truth. Elon Musk is not a superhero. He is a concentrated pipeline from capital into technology, into politics, into profit, and you are living inside that pipeline whether you asked for it or not. The uncomfortable part is that you are not even supposed to notice it. Let's start with the story you have been sold. The public version of Elon Musk is performance. It is a carefully lit narrative where the man is the product and the product is the dream, Iron Man. The inventor who sleeps in a factory, the humble genius who laughs at tradition, the chaotic visionary who just tweets and somehow moves markets like a remote control. And in 2026, the myth is even more efficient because the internet now treats attention like oxygen. Every platform is competing for your eyes and every billionaire is competing for your belief. That is why the Iron Man framing works so well. It is easier to worship a character than to understand a mechanism. But the mechanism is what prints wealth. Musk built his status by doing one thing repeatedly. He made markets react before reality caught up. He would announce a large ambition, and money would flood toward the possibility. Investors do not buy facts, they buy momentum. When a narrative is strong enough, capital becomes a vote, and influence becomes a weapon. Picture a 32-year-old nurse named David in Phoenix. He works nights, hates his commute, and watches his savings lose buying power every time prices jump. His friend shows him a clip of Musk talking about the future, and David thinks maybe this time there is a path to escape the grind. David opens an account, buys something because a video made it feel like he was joining the future, and then the price collapses when the hype runs out and the market remembers the math. David tells himself the lie that it was just bad timing, because the alternative is admitting he was always being sorted. Now compare David's experience to the billionaire's world. When Musk impacts markets, he is not reacting like a citizen. He is acting like an owner. The same statement that makes small investors panic is the statement that helps insiders reposition, hedge, and restructure. And here is where the story gets truly ugly, and you need to hear it without comfort. In modern capitalism, attention is not just marketing. It is leverage. In 2026, AI is accelerating this more than people realize. Entire job families are shrinking not because workers are less skilled, but because software and machine assistants can do more with fewer humans. Companies reorganize. Middle-class work gets hollowed out, and the public response is predictable. Panic, then denial, then desperate searches for anything that looks like a guaranteed edge. That desperate search is exactly what billionaires exploit. Musk is a master at compressing time. He packages future technology as a character story, then he uses platforms and public pressure to make investors move fast. When you watch him publicly, you might think you are observing a personality. You are actually observing an instrument. Now, do not confuse this with fraud. Fraud would be illegal. What we are talking about is incentives. Legal incentives. Market incentives. The kind of incentives that can be exploited without breaking the law. The dark truth is this: you are not competing with geniuses. You are competing with capital that knows how to steer your emotions. Let's get specific about how power concentrates around one man. Musk's early genius in business was not inventing a single device and becoming rich. It was choosing industries where control of money flow and narrative control can compound. He did not just build companies, he built ecosystems of investors, customers, contractors, and regulators that depend on his visibility. Start with the payment story. People remember the big later things: cars, rockets, brain chip dreams. But the first crucial pattern was payment rails. Payment platforms are not glamorous, but they are political. Whoever helps move money helps decide who gets listened to and who gets paid. And payment is where mainstream finance becomes personal. When Musk pushed the idea that online commerce could be detached from legacy control, he was positioning himself to be an alternative gatekeeper. That gatekeeper role matters because gatekeepers can negotiate better terms, attract better partners, and extract more rent from the same activity. You might say, okay, that is business. True. But the method repeats: find a system that everyone relies on, attach your company to it, and then become indispensable. In 2026, This has another meaning. AI disruption of jobs is not just replacing tasks. It is replacing the human intermediaries that used to sit between people and systems. When customer support is automated, when basic coding is automated, when document processing is automated, the intermediaries vanish. Who benefits? The platforms that own the tools and the data. That is why the real competition in 2026 is not between individual workers. It is between institutions and owners of infrastructure. Musk is positioned as an owner of infrastructure in multiple domains: transport, energy, satellite communications, and public attention channels. Now let's talk about the second compounding force: timing around crisis. Every era has a moment when panic creates opportunity for people with cash. The average person runs to get safety. The billionaire runs to buy the price that desperation creates. During downturns, insiders tend to do three things. They accumulate assets, they raise control, they reduce exposure where outsiders are stuck. This is not a conspiracy. It is how wealth preservation works when you have liquidity. For a concrete example, think about how public companies behave around leadership changes and large capital moves. When a top executive signals something, the market responds. The market is a prediction machine built on emotion plus models. If you influence the prediction, you influence the price. Now here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. The market is not just responding to news, it is responding to who can afford to act next. That is why when Musk made moves involving public attention and major acquisitions, it did not just affect headlines, it affected expectation. And expectation is what drives valuation, but you need to connect this to your life, not just his. In 2026, the Federal Reserve is still the master switch for liquidity. Interest rate decisions filter into mortgage rates, auto loans, credit cards, and small business survival. You feel it when payments rise or when banks tighten standards. You feel it when savings returns do not compensate for the damage already done. Many people were told the inflation problem was temporary, that rates would stabilize things, and that the economy would normalize. They did not mention purchasing power. They did not mention that even if inflation cools on paper, real wages often do not fully recover. So you work, you pay more for everything, and you are told it is just how cycles work. Meanwhile, wealth concentration keeps accelerating. The top 1% keeps owning more than ever because they can borrow cheaply against assets. While you earn wages, they earn leverage. While you buy hours with your body, they buy time with capital. Musk sits in that world. He does not compete on wages, he competes on positioning. So how does he do it in practice? He makes himself the narrative spine of multiple bets that are too large for one company to execute alone. Then he attracts external capital, political attention, and partnership obligations. His brand reduces perceived risk for outsiders, even when technical risk remains enormous. That is how you get funding for ambitious projects that would otherwise die from the boring reality of cash constraints. In the early days, Musk needed massive resources for SpaceX and Tesla. Companies need money when they are building. A founder who is also a financier or a controller can survive longer and outmaneuver competitors who are forced to dilute or accept unfavorable terms. But if you think of it like a normal person, it sounds heroic. If you think of it like a financial strategist, it looks like control of survival. Micro story time. Imagine a small city in the Midwest where local factories are closing. A group of workers starts a rumor about AI taking jobs, and they all feel angry because their kids might not have stable work. They ask the same question: who is actually getting richer? The answer is not the worker, it is the owners of the systems replacing the workers. In the same city, a local business receives a contract to install an energy storage pilot. It is not because the workers are geniuses, it is because someone with institutional connections sees an opportunity, raises funding, and signs terms before competitors can react. Later, the business gets acquired or gets locked into a long supply agreement. That is what billionaires do. They do not just build technology, they build contractual reality. Now you can understand why the Iron Man image is useful beyond entertainment. The image is a credibility engine. When he says something bold, investors do not only imagine technology, they imagine a builder who will force outcomes through persistence and resource access. And the market rewards persistence, especially when the persistent party is wealthy enough to survive failure. But success and failure are not symmetrical. If you fail, you lose your job and your health. If Musk fails, investors learn a lesson, but the machine still keeps running because the machine is built around capital and control, not one person's paycheck. And then you get the next layer of power: He uses influence to steer perception, and perception to steer valuation. That brings us to Twitter, now redefined as a political attention platform in 2026. In every election cycle, attention platforms become battlefields. People argue about free speech because the concept is easy to chant. Underneath, the real issue is distribution of attention and distribution of credibility. A person who can reach millions quickly is not just a media figure. In modern finance, attention can move prices, trigger market sentiment, and influence what narratives dominate. When a billionaire controls or heavily influences a platform with global reach, he gains the ability to shape the discourse that investors use to make decisions. That is not rocket science. It is how human psychology works at scale. And if you are thinking, okay, but does it really matter? Let's connect it to something you actually experience. In 2026, your friends still discuss crypto like it is a lottery ticket or a symbol of freedom. But regulation tightened and institutions entered. Banks and major financial players did not flee crypto. They absorbed it. They learned how to structure it, manage it, and profit from it while leaving retail with the downside. Retail investors like to believe crypto is outside the system. It is not. It is a separate layer of the same system, and in that layer, the people with infrastructure win more consistently. Now think about how a platform can influence retail emotion. When social narratives shift, retail churn changes. When retail churn changes, volatility increases. Volatility is not only risk, volatility is also opportunity for those who can hedge. So when Musk's statements moved sentiment around digital assets, it was not just a random opinion online, it was a lever, and it moved the market because people were trained to react instantly. In 2026, you see the same pattern in the creator economy. Most people do not earn meaningful income from content. Many make nothing, some make a little, a small group makes fortunes. Yet social media keeps selling the dream that you can become financially independent by building an audience. That dream is emotionally compelling because it promises ownership without risk. But in reality, it is mostly a funnel for attention that benefits platforms and major advertisers. The creators who win are often the ones sponsored by capital, not the ones chosen by the algorithm. This is how the machine works. You are offered a story. The story creates your behavior creates profit for someone else. Musk uses this same system, but he does it with billionaire-scale resources. And here is where the stakes escalate into something you should not ignore. When a single figure gains control over multiple infrastructure layers, and when their platform influences discourse, power becomes centralized enough to matter. Not because he is evil, because centralized power can coordinate outcomes. In the public imagination, dystopia is a dramatic villain. In real life, dystopia is an efficient market machine with a human face attached. Now, remember the job disruption and the housing crisis in 2026. These are not separate problems. They are connected by the same structure: wealth concentration and the conversion of assets into dominance. Housing is detached from wages across the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. People are not bad at saving. They are facing an asset price regime where the main driver is capital availability and scarcity of supply, combined with institutional demand. You can see it in basic mechanics. If money is cheap, capital flows into real estate and bids up prices. If interest rates rise, the financing costs increase, but the asset is already priced for the new reality. Then wages lag, then renters are trapped. Then the political system starts protecting the asset holders because asset holders fund influence. So while you struggle with affordability, someone like Musk sits on assets that can be leveraged. He can borrow against holdings and fund new ventures. He can convert equity into control. He can use brand to access partnerships. He can also influence narrative to shape how people value the future of technology. That is what makes him powerful in this moment. But that power is not the worst part. The worst part is what this kind of concentration does to the public's ability to make rational decisions. When your financial education is built around inspirational stories, you miss the mechanism. You think investing is about personal discipline. You think entrepreneurship is about hard work. You think the system rewards merit. Sometimes it does, but mostly it rewards access. In 2026, access comes from who owns infrastructure, who controls distribution, and who can move sentiment at scale. That is why the top 1% keeps growing. Not because everyone else is incompetent, because the rules allow capital owners to compound advantages while making everyone else fight for basics. This is the understanding part, the mechanism part. Now let's go darker. Tesla was not born as a one-man story. A lot of people believe the Tesla origin myth. Elon Musk discovers electricity magic and becomes Iron Man. The reality is more mundane and more instructive. Companies have founders, engineers, and early champions. They also have investors, governance structures, and legal leverage. Musk gained control because he participated at the moment when the company needed money and the founders needed certainty. When the money arrived, governance shifted. The people with capital also gained decision power. This is not unique to him. It is how ownership works in venture and public markets. Here is the uncomfortable lesson for you. Even if you believe in a genius, you should still ask who controls the board, who controls votes, and who controls survival capital. In that Tesla story, the key detail is governance. When you control governance, you control outcomes. When you control outcomes, you shape the narrative of who really built what. And narrative matters because narrative determines capital inflows. It also determines political support. So when Musk later sells a portion of stock or moves capital around major acquisitions, the public tries to interpret it emotionally. They ask if he believes in the company. They ask if he is preparing for catastrophe. They turn it into drama. The more accurate interpretation is that capital owners reposition when conditions are changing. In the next crisis, people with liquidity usually buy assets at better terms. That is not moral, it is mechanical. Now zoom out to global debt. In 2026, global debt remains above $300 trillion. That is not an interesting statistic. That is a pressure system. Governments, corporations, and households are all carrying obligations. When rates change, refinancing risk becomes a cascade. The Federal Reserve tries to manage inflation, but it cannot remove the underlying debt structure. It can only change the cost of servicing it. That means your future is partially governed by